No, but it was my job to make it happen. I mean, that's what a lawyer is for. Even me. If you're asking me, would I be able to get her to the point where she was a cooperator, where they were going to give her a tremendous break because she was a cooperator? When Dulos died, that put a big hole in that expectation.
Right now, since the audio's not on.
Oh, yeah. Morning, Michael Brown for Mr. Troconis.
Adele Patterson for Mr. Dulos. Of course.
One. Counsel for respond.
Sarah Jones for the respondent, City Connecticut Commissioner of Correction.
Russell Zentner for the respondent, State of Connecticut.
Good morning, Judge. Joanne Seward for the respondent.
Morning, counsel. Now I want to address media coverage of the matter. Pursuant to Practice Book Section 1-11B, subsection O, I met with counsel and media last Monday. We had a meeting concerning media coverage of this matter. Since that time, no objections have been filed to media coverage under 1-11B, subsection C, and I assume that, subject to the conditions that I'm going to announce, there is no objection from counsel as to media broadcasting, photography, and recording. Hearing none, I'm going to allow media to photograph, broadcast, and record this trial subject to the following conditions. No photographs of the contents of the judge's bench or desks of petitioner's counsel or respondent's counsel or any court personnel. No recording or broadcasting of any conversations occurring at these desks. No visual recordings or photographs of children. Don't think that's an issue, but just to be extra cautious, that is a condition as well. And finally, no recordings or photographs of any kind shall take place in the courtroom during any recesses, sidebars, or at any time that the judge is not present and on the record. Subject to these conditions, the media may photograph, record, and broadcast this trial. And I appreciate the cooperation of the media. There are a few other preliminary matters we must address. First, I'd like to canvass Mr. Troconis on a few preliminary matters that I discussed with counsel and chamber. So, round of path, may I do that?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Troconis.
Hello.
Are you feeling okay today?
You're what?
Oh, I just want to make sure that you understand that by bringing a habeas petition and alleging that your former attorney, Mr. Andrew Bowman, was ineffective, that you're waiving any attorney-client privilege you had with Mr. Bowman concerning the claims in this case. You understand that?
Yes.
Good. A few other questions for you. First, have you had an opportunity to become familiar with a pleading that the state filed, I believe, late Friday, entitled State's Request for Canvas? Have you had that read to you?
I don't read it, but they tell me about it.
Okay, so you have become familiar with that pleading?
Yes.
Okay. And do you understand what the state is claiming in that pleading?
Yes.
And knowing that, is your desire to go forward with this trial today with the claims that you are making?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, I'll hear any preliminary matters from counsel, including exhibits. Right.
Yeah, yes, Your Honor. I was going to start with the exhibits. I'm confident we have an agreement on petitioners 1 through 7, which are transcripts from pretrial and trial proceedings. We also have agreement on 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, and 15.
Is that correct,
Counsel, Mr. Zentner.
Yes, sir. Those exhibits are admitted in full.
And I also believe it's 17 through 24. I don't understand the name section of those.
You said no. All exhibits.
And my understanding is the respondent has provided the interviews in question and also some of the exhibits that we've also offered, but exhibit 25 is the video of the transport of Mr. Troconis after her first arrest. Also offering that. I'm not certain if there's agreement on that.
There you go. Take it full exhibit.
Well, that's it for me for now. There's a couple other take-up lists that kind of those same thing.
Any preliminary matters from the respondent?
I think that it says defendant's exhibit, but it could also be interchangeably called the respondent's exhibits. They are, for the record, A through S, and they appear to be the ones that we uploaded on thumb drive and the other reference and noted in the exhibits.
All right. Are you offering those at this time?
Yeah.
A2S?
Yeah.
Any objections, Brian?
Yep. Maybe I could ask, is it A, K, and S? We could take that up. I can take that up with the respondent during the first break.
Yes.
I think A would be okay. I just confirm that I actually know what that exhibit is before I read it. But there shouldn't be an issue with any of them, but I think K and S, they need to come up through witness testimony.
Yeah, if counsel have an issue involving, for the record, A and S is insane. I intend that I could, for those who authenticated through the examination of Attorney Bowman at some point, probably most likely this afternoon.
And then today I'm just asking for an opportunity to make sure that we're on the same page about what that is before we, but I don't think there's going to be an issue.
We'll hold off on defense exhibits and give you that. Any other preliminary matters?
Ron,
Ron, they call you first witness.
thank you, Bowman, please, Sharon.
Good morning, sir.
Good evening, Ron.
Thanks. Standing in. Thank you.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or solemnly sincerely affirm, as the case may be, that the answers you shall give concerning this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God or upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your last name, and give your business address for the court.
Andrew Bowman, 1804 Post Road East, Westport, Connecticut.
All right, sir. Please be sure to keep your voice up in answering the questions.
I'll do my best.
Thank you, sir. When you're ready, Mr. Brown.
Do you want us to lectern?
Yes, whatever is convenient.
Good morning. Do you know Michelle Troconis?
Of course,
How do you know her?
I represented her in 2019 and in January of 2020.
And testified previously in motion to suppress hearings related to her criminal trial?
I did,
Okay. You have some recollection of her representation
yes,
and in your testimony at the motion to suppress?
yes.
Okay. And what do you recall how you came to represent Mr. Troconis?
I got a call, the first call I got was from Mike Rose. I was on vacation in Vermont with my wife. He asked me if I would speak, without going into the conversation, he asked me if I would speak with a friend whose wife is missing. And I said, if he wants to call me, I'd be happy to talk to him.
Okay, and for the sake of sort of clarifying things, was that friend identified in that phone call whose wife is missing?
I'm not sure it was.
Were you aware of the disappearance that was an issue in the case at the time of that first phone call?
No.
Okay. And if you recall the dates related to this case has been when the disappearance, when you first met with Mr. Troconis?
Yeah, of course I do. Yes.
Okay. And the disappearance was?
May 24, 2019.
And of course, the disappearance was of Dulos' wife, Jennifer Farber Dulos.
I later came.
Okay. Do you know when you learned that?
Ask it again.
Do you know when you learned about the facts or the general issue that was the focus of your discussion with Mr. Troconis?
Well, I got a call. I got a call from Dulos.
Okay. And do you recall what day the phone call microphone was?
I think it was Saturday.
Okay. And
That would be the 25th.
okay, 25th. Do you know when you talked to Mr. Dulos?
25th.
Okay. And as a result of that phone call, did anything else? Did you learn of what sort of the basic facts were?
He told me that he was going to be going to the Buchanan police station. I told him that I was on vacation and wouldn't be back in the office until Tuesday. And that was the sum total of the conversation.
Was Mr. Troconis discussed during that phone call?
No.
Okay. And was that phone call related to potentially retaining Mr. Dulos retaining you?
Well, all I agreed to do was speak with him.
Okay.
So we didn't discuss him retaining me because I told him I wouldn't be available.
Okay.
And I also offered him no advice.
Okay. And then at some point, did you talk to Mr. Dulos again, or did you talk to Mr. Troconis? What's the next thing that happened?
The next thing that happened was that I was in my office on Tuesday. That was Memorial Day weekend. And I got a call from Gene Riccio, who Mr. Dulos had gone to see over the weekend because he was apparently when he went to the Buchanan police on Saturday, he was with his divorce lawyer. So Gene called me and he said, would you be interested in speaking with Mr. Troconis? He didn't name her, but he said that she was Dulos' girlfriend.
Okay. And through those first couple calls, did you learn some general facts going on? Is that fair to say?
He told me very little.
Okay. And do you recall the name of the divorce lawyer that went to Buchanan with Dulos?
Don't hold me to the pronunciation, but I think it's high ranker.
Okay. You remember the first name?
Jacob.
Okay. And was it your understanding after that phone call with Riccio, that Mr. Dulos had retained between Riccio?
I assume that to be the case.
Okay. And then there was a request to talk to his girlfriend.
Correct.
Did you talk to the girlfriend as a result of that phone call?
The following day, Mr. Troconis came to my office. That would have been May 29th. And I met with her. I'd say we met for about an hour and a half or so. She was with Mr. Dulos, who remained in my waiting room, and only Mr. Troconis was present with me in my conference room.
Were you retained that day?
Dulos gave me $5,000 to represent Mr. Troconis.
Okay.
So although we had no written agreement, I considered myself retained.
Could you also keep that $5,000?
No. I returned it to Norm Pattis, who eventually represented Mr. Dulos.
Was there a reason why you returned the $5,000 that you received?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. Number one, there was always the potential for conflict. And so there was no reason for me to hold on to a co-defendant's money. I mean, that would never happen.
Right. And I know, to jump ahead on slightly, were you ultimately retained by Mr. Troconis for the criminal matter that eventually came about?
Yes, on the 3rd of June.
Okay. And so on the 29th, generally tell us what the purpose of that meeting was, Mr. Troconis.
She came into my conference room. She told me who she was. She told me that the history of how she had met Mr. Dulos. She told me that Fotis said that his lawyer, who at the time was Pyranker, said you better make timelines of what you were doing on that Friday. And there was a discussion about Fotis being apparently at the decedent's home on Wednesday, which was news to Mr. Troconis. She went through her history, her educational background. She told me was a high school graduate and that she had spent 3.5 years doing special education which I wasn't clear whether that was university level or what it was, but it was certainly higher education. She told me the history of how she had met Fotis, that she had met him at a water skiing club in Florida, that their relationship was at first, I don't want to say platonic, but it hadn't reached an intimate level, that she also had met his kids, that he told her that he was still married, but in the middle of a divorce that was amicable, and that basically as meetings went on and he became more specific, he said, look, it's really all over except for the signing of papers. So she told me that she made a decision at his request that she move to Connecticut in anticipation of his divorce.
And this is all on May 29th, this discussion that you just summarized for us.
Yes, and more. It's a summary, but more. Yes.
So, I want to ask a little bit about the more in a second, but generally speaking, was that meeting, would you say there was an expectation that there was an arrest forthcoming for Mr. Thomas?
At some point.
Okay.
Sure.
That was the expectation?
Expectation.
Okay. And where did that expectation come from?
Let's see, it was Wednesday. At the meeting, there was the publicity around the case was huge. There was tremendous pressure on the case. She was telling me that she was innocent and not involved in any way. And she said it verbally, and she gave me a timeline, which she believed demonstrated her innocence and non-involvement in whatever happened to Jennifer Dulos.
Timeline? You said she gave it to you. You took possession of the timeline?
I took possession of it. Yes, correct.
And are you familiar with timelines that were received by the police in the search?
I am familiar with the timelines that were seized by the police.
Are those the same timelines that you had, or was the timeline you had one of the items?
One of the items.
Okay.
Because they seized other timelines that were in Fotis' handwriting, but the one that Mr. Troconis gave me was in her handwriting.
Okay. So on May 29th, you received the one in her handwriting?
Yes.
So you had that throughout your representation of her?
Throughout.
Okay. And just to clarify or expand on what you just answered, you said that Mr. Troconis proclaimed your innocence, that you were expecting an arrest. And I guess I'm just trying to get from where that expectation is coming from on May 29th.
There was pressure, tremendous pressure. I mean, you couldn't think that, oh, well, I don't think anything will happen until the fall. I mean, that's crazy.
Okay. And ultimately, you talked about things in the media, information out there. Do you recall on May 29th, what was, I'll say, out there, meaning public information that would have been of concern for Mr. Troconis' possible criminal?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember ultimately there was media coverage of stops made in Hartford and Mr. Dulos' vehicle flashback being dropped off?
That there was media coverage?
Yes.
On the 29th?
Well, I guess I'm asking, do you remember when that came about? Had that broken yet? Is I guess what I'm trying to get.
Not to my knowledge at the time.
Okay. Do you recall what had broken as far as what Mr. Troconis would have as exposure or concern about exposure?
I don't recall the media at the time.
Did you have any information to make specifically think that there was a reason to believe arrested for Mr. Troconis?
When?
On the 29th.
Did I have information, or did I understand that in these kinds of cases there's going to be an arrest? Well, the big deal was they had Fotis' phone. That's number one, which was a big deal. When I found that they had taken Fotis' phone on Saturday, the 25th, that...
Okay. And did you have any specific information about that being bad for Mr. Troconis?
She was the third part in this triangle. So, did I have any information? No, but I would have to be foolish to ignore the fact that there could be an imminent arrest.
Okay, so I guess the context, the circumstances were what gave you that expectation. Is that fair to say?
As well as all the experience I've had.
Okay, and I want to talk about that in a minute, but for example, have you talked to anyone with the police or the state attorney's office on the 29th
No,
to get information about what was up there?
no.
Okay, and so you described what Mr. Troconis told you on the 29th. Was there more topics that she gave you some personal background? He told you about the relationship with Mr. Dulos. Anything else that comes to mind?
The day, the 24th.
Okay.
That's what the timeline was.
Okay.
And what she did from the time she got up until 5 o'clock or so. But there was nothing about the trip to Hartford in the timeline.
Okay, but you didn't know about that was a known issue at that point.
That was not a known issue.
Okay, and is it fair to say that there was, at that point, the belief that Mr. Dulos was responsible to get out in the media at that point, right?
Action calls for speculation.
If you know,
May I have a question?
As far as media coverage or sort of the context, was there a belief that at least Mr. Dulos was very much a suspect or a person of interest at that point?
I didn't get it from the media. I understood it.
Okay.
He's a husband. He's in a bitter divorce.
Okay. You said they took the phone on the 25th from Mr. Dulos, because you didn't know anything about what was in the phone at that point, right?
I didn't know anything about it.
Nothing about what was in the phone then made public at that point or available to you.
Not available to
Okay, so during that meeting, did you give Mr. Troconis advice about preparing for an arrest?
Objection. No foundation. Dulos was outside.
I think you can answer one way or the other. Go ahead, Sue.
At that meeting, preparing for her arrest?
Yeah.
No.
Did you tell her she should expect to be arrested based on anything?
I thought it was implicit that she would be arrested. I don't think. That's why she's there.
Did she express to you how she ended up there? Why she called you or why she was put in touch with you?
You mean, you mean from the particular lawyers? That what are you asking me? Did she express her understanding or did she ask me?
We'll start with expressing her understanding.
Yeah, I think she felt that she felt she was in jeopardy, but it was coming basically from FOTUS and the fact that the police had been to their house in Farmington on Friday evening when they returned from the trip to Hartford. But she didn't say the trip to Hartford, okay? But she said the police came to that.
Her house Friday night.
Correct.
Do you know that was the first time that she became aware of the disappearance of these Dulos?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And I guess I'm asking if you recall, did she express anything as far as, I'm here because I think I'm in trouble, I'm here because someone else told me to come here, I'm here because of, did she give you any statements of that?
Yeah. She said, I'm here because FOTUS told me that I need a lawyer.
Did she express any confusion about why she needed a lawyer?
No.
Okay. Because it was, you said, obvious from the circumstances at that point?
I thought it was.
Okay. When I say preparing for an arrest, could you tell her you may be arrested, you're you should do who you
I
are?
told her to stay in touch with me. I said, call me anytime. I said, if anything's on your mind, don't stand on ceremony. Just pick up the phone and call me. Let me know what's going on.
Okay. And other than gathering information from her and those basics, did you give her anything else that you would call advice on the 29th?
Not to talk to anybody.
Okay. Did you get into any hypotheticals about what you got in the end of an arrest?
No.
Did you talk about whether she would potentially become a cooperator or anything of that nature during the 29th meeting? Was that ever spoken about?
No.
Okay. Why not?
She claimed to be innocent, but in love with Fotis. She changed her whole life for him. And that continued throughout the course of the presentation.
And so, this discussion of her representation, or her relationship with Fotis, did she discuss with you her view of whether Fotis would have a motive to kill Jennifer at that point?
Well, she did, but whether it was at that meeting, I can't tell you for certain. But she felt he had no.
Okay. You don't know that was the 2019 night, but that eventually became.
Yeah, I mean, it became.
Okay.
So she felt that there was no motive for Fotis to kill his wife. Based on what Fotis.
Okay.
The information that she had came from Fotis.
So her secondhand information was such that she didn't think there was a reason why he would have done this.
Yes, the impression I got was that she didn't think he would do such a thing, or that he had done this.
So at that point in time, you said you didn't discuss potential cooperation with her.
No, we didn't.
Would you say that you made any assessments or judgments about her as a witness, how she would do, anything of that nature at that first meeting?
Yes.
And can you tell me about that?
I thought she was persuasive. I thought she was earnest in what she was telling me. It's not that I formed an unchangeable opinion of her as a respected defendant, witness, the universe of what she could be. But it was clear she was telling me she was innocent. She didn't believe Fotis had killed his wife. That she had done a timeline where she thought about what she had done on Friday the 24th. So she didn't come unprepared. And I, cut both ways. She struck me as intelligent. She had a daughter who she loved, told me about her daughter. So her claim of non-involvement in whatever happened to Jennifer was credible. Once again, I'm not saying I formed 100% certainty about that, but she appeared to be articulate and very much claiming her innocence.
And I didn't start with your experience, but at this point, when you met Mr. Troconis the first time, how long have you been practicing?
About 50 years.
They're saying this sort of working judgment of the client is part of just sort of standard thing that you can do in that situation.
Yeah, and I have experience enough to know that sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong.
And as far as the sort of pre-arrest posture that you were in at that meeting on 29, is that a familiar posture that you've been in with clients over the practice?
Absolutely.
Okay. And what about with a situation where the person you're talking to could be a co-conspirator with someone else, potentially in sort of not this exact scenario, sort of potentially someone else co-conspirator might.
Well, she was, as I said before, she was the third point in a triangle here.
Okay.
The stereotypic girlfriend. I'm not saying that's what I thought of her as, but, there was no question you had a relationship here.
Okay. And have you represented cooperators in state court before?
I have represented co-defendants who had adverse positions to the principal, shall I say.
And what about in a situation where at the pre-arrest stage, the things are that clear as being potential for being conspirator with other individuals?
In state court,
Yes.
it's more common in federal court because, the usual situation is a person is not indicted It's the FBI's out or whoever the agency is. In state court, it's much more that people have been arrested. Okay. Now, I'm just thinking about more often if people would come to me as victims, that would be more the pre-arrest situation. But I have represented people who considered cooperating and testifying against critically.
Victims in the pre-arrest.
No, what I'm saying is that where you have a situation where a person comes in before an arrest, it's, in my experience, in state court, it has been a combination of victims and real co-defendants.
Okay. And just quickly with the federal process, would you agree that the federal process is a little bit more defined, the stages and being target and being all those things than state court can sometimes be? Or would you disagree?
I'm not going to agree or disagree. What I can say is it depends on the particular case. I mean, I had plenty of cases in federal court where the first thing I knew was the arrest, the indictment, before I ever spoke to the person. But yeah, I mean, in white-collar cases, the norm is that they send somebody a target letter. Okay, they send them a target letter, they get a lawyer. Could be me, could be somebody else. But that's the norm in a white-collar case where you have a crime of violence, a drug case, extortion, then you're going to see the arrest first.
Okay. And as far as even cooperation in the federal system, is that a little bit more defined than it can be in state courts? Structure might be the word I've used.
I think there is more structure to it, no question.
Okay. And did you have a sense at the time that you spoke to Mr. Troconis, if there was an arrest, who would do the arresting or where the jurisdiction might be in the case or anything of that nature?
I assumed the New Canaan police and the state police.
Okay. So, did you take any steps after the May 29th meeting, other than the advice you gave Mr. Troconis, to further your representation?
You mean with any other, for example, with law enforcement or anybody else? No. I did not speak with law enforcement. I did not speak with law enforcement after the 29th and until Friday, which was the 31st, when they called me from the Litchfield barracks. State police had executed and were executing a search warrant of Michelle, Troconis, and Dulos, where they took them to the Litchfield barracks, photographed them, and processed them, took their fingerprints. When I got a call from there, and it was, I think initially it was a trooper who put Michelle on the phone. And she told me.
So that was post-execution of the warrant? As in they had her, she was...
Correct.
Oh. And at that point...
Wait.
Sorry.
29th, the 31st was the Litchfield call, and then the arrest came on the evening of Saturday evening. And I first learned about that on Sunday morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning.
Just the best of your recollection, that trooper putting Michelle on the phone, was that during the body warrant service or after the arrest?
No, that was the body warrant.
Okay. And did you talk to Michelle before that was executed about the warrant?
I talked to her, but she may have called me from the pond, but I talked to her definitely that evening.
So, you talked on the 29th, the meeting, and you're saying, your recollection, or you're saying that you talked to her post 29th, pre-arrest, about the search warrant, the body warrant?
Just want to make sure that I'm accurate here. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you talked to her before the execution about the warrant?
Objection.
Well, no, it wouldn't have been.
Objection. Second, there's some objections. Objection to the form of the question is specific. Straightforward, with the rest of the rephrase. I agree. That clarify.
I agree. So, did you talk to Michelle about the body warrant before it was served on her?
You mean, did I have noticed they were going to serve it on her? No.
Yeah. And so you talked to her from the when you got
The police had come to pick them up. I believe she was at the pond. And so she may have called me from the pond. I definitely spoke to her at the time. But I also spoke to her at Litchfield Barracks.
okay, and did you give her any information?
Don't talk to anybody.
Okay. Did you go to Litchfield Barracks?
No.
Why not?
I think they explained that they were only going to, photograph them.
And
And they weren't going to question her.
And did you get any information from police about any future upcoming action with Mr. Troconis at that point?
No.
Did you take any action with law enforcement or the state attorney at that time about your representation, Mr. Troconis?
You mean between Friday night and Saturday night?
Yes.
No.
Okay. And going back a little bit, has your practice ever included sending, I wouldn't know a stoppage letter, but a letter to law enforcement saying, in the pre-arrest stage, I represent this individual. They're not going to talk. They'll contact me.
I had.
Okay. Why did you not?
I didn't anticipate that. I didn't anticipate this was going to take long. And I thought that she was certainly intelligent enough to know that she shouldn't talk to them.
And
because I told her, this was not something that was, oh, and by the way, don't have, any conversations with the police.
so that conversation on Friday is don't talk, right? Or that's part of the conversation.
The conversation with her,
Yes.
I talked to the trooper. I told him, don't question.
Okay. Did you talk to her on Saturday before she was arrested?
I think I talked to her later that night. I'm not sure I talked to her on Saturday. I don't recall whether I.
At that point, was there any further discussion about preparing for an arrest or any future law enforcement action?
No.
Why not?
Why didn't we talk on Saturday? I could have talked to her on Saturday, but preparing for the arrest, I didn't talk to her.
Okay.
I didn't talk to her. The next time I spoke to anybody was at 1:00 that morning.
And so there was a warrant that was served on Friday night, right?
I'm
We
sorry.
just talked about the warrant. There was a warrant that was
Search.
Yes. And did you get access to that warrant?
I didn't have access to it.
Okay. And then I know you said, but there was an arrest Saturday night.
Yes, there was.
Okay. And you said Sunday morning, or
I found out about it when they called me at home at 1:15 a.m. Sunday morning.
and did you talk to Mr. Troconis at that time?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember what that conversation consisted of?
Yeah, don't talk to them.
Okay. Did you tell her you were gonna do anything after that call, or?
Well, I spoke to Kimball. And I could have spoken to one other trooper there. Yeah. And they wanted to talk to her.
Okay. And when you say they wanted to talk to her, that was the substance after the arrest of what Kimball or whoever you spoke with said you want to talk to her?
On the phone. She wants to talk to you, and we want to talk to her.
Okay. So going back to Friday, for example, did that trooper say you want to talk to her and you're not letting us, or was that part of that discussion at all previously?
Oh, he agreed.
Okay. So is it fair to say this conversation after the arrest is the first time law enforcement said you would like to speak to Mr. Troconis?
Yes.
Okay. And would you tell Mr. Troconis that you were going to do anything after that phone call? Or during that phone call, did you tell her what you were going to do next on her behalf?
I told her not to talk to them.
Okay. Did you see her again after that?
Yes.
Okay. When did you see her?
I saw her Sunday. I saw her on at least 2, possibly 3 different occasions.
Okay.
As the lieutenant police.
So, single phone call, or assuming whoever you talked to said you want to talk to Mr. Troconis.
Correct.
Was there any discussion with them beyond their desire to talk to you at that time?
No.
So when you came to the police
I
department,
may have asked them what the bond was.
okay,
I'm sure I asked them what the bond was.
okay. Did you get the warrant at that point?
No.
And so the first time you talked to Mr. Troconis at the Lincoln Police Department, was that in the morning?
Probably. And I say probably because I know that her interview with them started around 11 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had been up there. I think I made 3 trips.
Okay. And so that the first trip, what you recall of it, what was the substance of that? Well, let's start with the first time you went there, did you meet with Mr. Troconis?
Yes.
Did you have a substantive conversation with her?
Yes.
Do you recall that first conversation? Are you able to divide up the different conversations that day?
No. No, but I did. Yes and no. Okay. Between the first and the second, I can.
Okay.
But the last the conversation I had that led to the interview, I certainly can.
Is it fair to say the first and second conversation were we're going to talk conversations?
Correct.
Okay. So that first conversation, did you ask her if she wanted to talk to the police?
No.
Okay. Did you give her an opinion about whether she should go to the police?
Of course.
What was the opinion?
Don't talk to the police.
Okay. And at that point, you don't have the warrant, but you have some information about what's going on?
Some.
And the Hartford stops Brooklyn at that point, I guess I'll say?
No.
No? Okay. So, do you recall what you had? The best you can. If you can't, just let us know. But that first meeting, do you recall what you knew walking in there that I'll say the police had on Mr. Troconis?
I didn't know everything they had.
Okay. Do you recall what you knew that they knew? I guess I'll say.
I knew what she told me about what she did that day. And she was very specific about everything she had done that day up till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And that included from the time she got up in the morning. What I said to her was, I don't want you talking to the police. But if you talk to them, they're going to use whatever you say to them against you. And she knew this because they had already given her Miranda warnings when she was arrested at a different location. Apparently they brought her to another barracks, and then they brought her to New Canaan. And I explained again what she had told me. They told her that she had the right to silence, that anything she said could be used against her, that she had a right to a lawyer, but I was her lawyer if she wanted me. And, that if she wanted to talk to them, she could talk to them, but there are big risks in talking to them, and, she could stop talking at any time. But my advice at that time was, don't talk to them.
And your how long that first meeting was?
It was, I think, probably maybe a half hour.
Okay. And the meeting ends, the consensus is we're not talking, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Did anything happen after that meeting?
I got another call to come back.
Okay. Did you get it?
And we had discussions. I had discussions with the police about the bond, about where she was going to be held. And, they said, well, look, if she's not going to be talking, we're going to take her to Niantic. And I said, don't take her to Niantic. Let her stay here. It's one night. And then I left. I got another call because you couldn't post the bond. Okay, the condition of the bond was you could only post it to the courthouse. It's $500,000 at the courthouse. They told me that. They told her that. So there wasn't a lot more I could do at that point.
Did you get a call from anybody other than Michelle Troconis that morning related to the case?
Yes.
Who did you hear from?
I heard from Richard Colangelo.
Tell us about that.
This is after I had informed the police that she wouldn't be talking to me. He said to me, if we find the body, we're going to charge her with accessory murder. So we want her cooperation. But if she's not going to cooperate, this is what I intend to do. And of course, there's no accessory after the fact in Connecticut. It's murder.
So, did you know Richard Colangelo before that conversation?
For quite a while.
Is that conversation sort of consistent with conversations, this style of conversations you had before?
I've had many conversations over the years with Richard Colangelo about many different cases.
And so, in this call, I don't want to characterize that how you characterize it. Is it sort of a threat, or is it how would you characterize what that trend was?
Well, it was both. It was a statement of present intention, which I found to be credible, and it was a threat.
Why'd you find?
I had dealt with him for years, and although our relationship was strictly adversarial, I had never found him to lie to me. We sometimes didn't agree, and sometimes it was, I wouldn't say it was acrimonious, but it was, we were both expressing our respective positions. He represented the state, I represented a defendant, but I never found him to be dishonest.
Well, the practice in that for a moment. Each of the records give the purpose to augment the records to be misidentified, or what his status was, things of that nature. So the records are. Fuck you.
Oh, you probably. Who was Richard Colangelo? Well, take one little step back here. Do you remember the date of this conversation? What date are we at, if you recall?
The date of the conversation
Yes.
that we're...
And then she's in the police station.
Yeah, it was June 2nd.
Okay, so June 2nd.
Yeah, it was June 2nd.
June 2nd, 2019, what was Richard Colangelo's role?
He was the state's attorney for the judicial district of the state.
Okay. And he told us basically what he relayed to you in that call.
Yes.
Do you recall what, if anything, you said to him?
I didn't give him any, I didn't say, do you really mean, I didn't say that to him. The message he was giving me along with the fact that they thought she was lying. Okay. She's lying. We want her cooperation. If she's not going to cooperate, if we find Jennifer's body, we're going to charge her with accessory murder. That was the sum and substance of the conversation, if not verbatim. So I think I sat down and
As far as the line goes at that point, have there been any statements made by Mr. Troconis to law enforcement or to the police?
No, I think no. But he was not impressed with what he anticipated was going to be her.
And so you didn't ask him, do you really mean it, Mr. Colangelo? Did you ask based on what? And he said, I'm going to charge her with murder if she doesn't talk.
Objection. So, look at it wrong. You say murder, it's an accessory.
You heard briefly, I think the point is that accessory and principal are not distinct in the state of Connecticut. But I will get back to, I'll ask the question directly. Whatever Mr. Colangelo relayed to you about what he intended to do as far as charging Mr. Troconis, did you ask him what that would be based on in that phone call? Did you say, what, based on what? What would you base that?
No, he was no. I didn't get a sense that he was unfocused and had a case to me, so I could comment on it.
Okay. And did you have any information at that point that the discovery of Miss Dulos' body was imminent? That they were going to find Jennifer that day?
They were all over the place. They were digging. It was all over the news, looking, everywhere for her. It was intense. There was an intense investigation. There was a lot of heat on it.
And in your experience at that, whether Attorney Colangelo would agree to it, are there potential protections for someone in that position we're being asked to talk to the police.
Objection to the form of question.
Are there
I'll allow it. Go ahead.
are there potential protections for people? What's the rest of the question?
Who the police want to talk to that have been arrested, who are seen as valuable witnesses to the police.
Sure. Potential.
Can you just maybe summarize what comes to mind when we're discussing that, so we're sure we're talking about the same things?
Well, it depends who you're talking about. You know, if you're talking about a potential co-conspirator, you know, they could say, you know, if we find him or her credible, you know, we might be willing to offer them some form of immunity, whether it's use immunity, transactional, but it has to do a lot with how they view the particular person. I mean, you're not going to, if you have, let me just give an example. If you have somebody who is present at a murder, you're not going to just offer them immunity before you even hear what they have to say. So it depends a lot on what the posture of the case is against a particular target defendant.
As far as it's fair to say, do you make any requests for any protections for Michelle if she did decide to talk in that moment?
No.
Why not?
First,
I just thought, okay, what time period are we talking about? At what point? I'm a little bit confused. At what point is it between the second and third time in this conversation? I'm just want to possibly just clarify at what juncture we're talking about.
Right. I'm sorry.
If you wish.
We're still talking about the phone call. How many phone calls with Mr. Clanko was there that day? If you recall.
there could have been two.
Okay. What I'm calling the threat, how are you going to characterize it? Fast dating, first phone call?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm talking about that in response to this statement of attention.
I understand. Yes.
Did you ask for any sort of protection from Michelle?
I didn't think that there was I thought there was zero possibility that he would ever grant her immunity since he thought he had enough evidence to charge her with accessory murder.
Again,
And that wouldn't be, and that, if you're asking me right off the bat, I mean, that happens so infrequently that it's just, that's not what law enforcement does. They have to be able to gauge credibility.
and would it hurt to ask for some sort of protection for her if she was what would the downside of it?
The downside, you could say no.
Okay. And then, is it fair to say, I just want to make sure we're talking about your mental process the same way here. I'm understanding it. Your belief in his ability to charge, as he indicated, was based on sort of trusting in him as someone who wasn't going to lie to you?
Well, yes, but it wasn't blind trust. I think that any lawyer who hears that a prosecutor is going to charge his client with murder would be foolish to think, oh, well, you know, he's just bluffing. I wasn't going to call his bluff.
Would it be calling his bluff to say, can you just tell me what based on? Can you let me know why my client should talk to you?
I didn't.
Okay. And are you saying the downside, or you just simply didn't do it, or?
No, what I'm saying to you is I didn't. I testified that I didn't. I'm not making excuses. I'm not saying I should have. I'm saying I didn't.
Yeah. And did you, again, I'm just trying to flesh out the pieces that were available to you. Did you have independent information about how they would charge her with accessory to murder? What specific evidence there was other than being third in the triangle?
Did he give me anything more specific? No.
Did anybody? Did you have anything more specific?
No.
Did you feel like you could assess the probability of an arrest if she didn't talk without that information? I'll back up actually.
Well, wait a minute. I couldn't with certainty make an assessment of whether they were going to find the decedent. I couldn't make that judgment about when and whether. I would say to you that the when was more of a question than the whether, because the way it looked, and from what I understood, it was likely they were going to find the body.
Do you recall what that understanding was about thinking you were going to find the body at that
Well, I'm telling you, there was tremendous pressure. They were out, objectively, they were out digging. They were out looking in every single place. And from what I understood about the case at that point, it was a murder that had occurred Friday morning. And now, it's a little more than a week later. What was the probability they wouldn't find the body? I can't quantify it. But it was, in my view, it was far less than 50% that they would not find the body.
What about the probability that they would actually have probable cause to arrest Michelle Troconis for accessory to murder? If she didn't make an assessment of that.
It was surprising to me that so.
And did you have a sense that Mr. Troconis was potentially valuable to the state at that point in time?
Based on what she told me, I thought she would have value on the one hand. But that was because what she told me about the timeline, she said that she and Fotis had sat down together and done the timeline. And because they had done it together, it raised real issues for me about her value. Of course, her value would have been greater if she, at that time, I understood that she was going to say, Fotis tried to set up, a false alibi, where I was going to be the alibi witness. But she never said that.
So just to sort of clarify the concern there, there's a timeline that she's given you that you think could potentially be helpful
To her.
But the fact that she had prepared it with Fotis, can you tell us about what concerns that raised for you? Just to be clear.
Well, the guy was the target of a murder investigation, and she's sitting down with him, and they're coming to an agreement about what the timeline was.
And so you understood that had been prepared from the May 29th meeting, right?
Yes.
That concern was throughout the representation.
Yeah, she said that Fotis told her that Jacob said to do the timeline. Well, not that he told him what to put in the timeline, but that he told him.
And the May 29th meeting, the May 29th meeting, did you push back on her and all about the fact that they sat together?
No.
So, when you're weighing the value she might have at that time, my understanding, you're saying you understood that she had real risks of being seen as not independent voters with that timeline at least?
Yes.
And is your understanding that Attorney Colangelo didn't know about the timeline at that point, or did
I knew after that he knew about the timeline because they executed a search warrant at Fort Jefferson and found in the trash timelines. But he didn't raise it at the time. But, in my you haven't asked me about my conversation with Michelle after I spoke with Colangelo. So we're going to raise that.
Yeah, we're going to. So, but just the.
No, I didn't know that they had found it. The Tuesday before she came to see me, they did the timelines. As I can read from the warrants, etc.
Okay, and you didn't read the warrants on June 2nd, is that fair to say?
It wasn't in that warrant.
Okay. Did you read the warrants that were available at that time before advising Mr. Fox?
I didn't read the arrest warrant.
Okay. Did you have the body warrant?
No.
Okay. So, the first phone call, if there was more than one, the first phone call ends. What do you do after you talk to Mr. Colangelo that first time? That intention is.
I went back and told Mr. Troconis exactly what he had said.
Okay. And
And I said, we have a decision. What I said to her was, whatever you do, if you go in there and speak with them, it's gotta be the truth. You cannot lie. It has to be the truth. She said she understood. And I told her again, she did not have to go in there. She had the right to remain silent.
What's your advice then? What was your advice? Well, she should
Persist in the right to remain silent?
Yes.
I told her to go in, and if she was prepared to tell the truth, I told her to speak with the police.
That was the second meeting?
It was probably whatever it was after the Colangelo phone call.
So, your recollection is that you went 3 times.
I'm not saying I went 3 times. 2 times. My belief is that it was at least 2 times. It could have been 3.
We know that the first time you went because of the arrest itself, right?
Yes.
Do you think that the reason why you went back the second time was to convey what Mr. Colangelo had said, or was there another reason why you went?
I spoke to him at the station. I was not anywhere other than at the station.
But did you go back in as a result of the phone call?
Go back?
Did you talk to Michelle?
Yes, I just said that. I just described that.
I'm just trying to get some clarity here. So, whenever the phone call happens, you go in as a result of the phone call.
I changed my position.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, sorry, I don't get the.
Before, I didn't want her to talk to you.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And then after you convey that intention, right?
Whatever you said.
Did Michelle immediately agree to talk to the police, or what happened?
We had a discussion, you know. I laid it out for her, but, you know, I said, look, they really want your cooperation. I mean, they were all over me about the cooperation. And that's, you know, that's not in and of itself persuasive, but they were very consistent in the fact that they wanted her as a cooperator. They didn't promise not to continue to prosecute her for the tampering and hindering, but they were anxious, and I thought it was something that was part of the mix, and why I recommended to her that she should go.
So, I'm sorry I'm asking this thing.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Do you remember how many times you went to the met with her that day before you spoke with the police? Was it 6 times?
You're asking me before I spoke to you. Oh, you mean the interrogation? Why don't you understand?
So, at the New Canaan Police Department, you met with Michelle more than once before you met with Michelle and the police for the first interview.
No,
Right.
yes.
Do you remember how many times you met with her before the first interview with the police? At the New Canaan Police Department.
Each time I was there, I only went there to see her and, you know, talk to the police, but I wouldn't go to the station without seeing her.
That's what I'm asking, and I can show you a document where we help. Do you believe that she was pulled out of herself and talked to you at a meeting 2 times or 3 times that day?
I can't tell you.
The document says 3 times, would you work with that?
The document, what document is it?
Prisoner log, would you like to see it?
Look, if you're telling me it was 3 times or 2 times, I've never said I was clear on how many times. Okay?
Yes. So, you recall there being a gap between a meeting when you discussed potentially speaking and then ultimately the meeting where you finalized the decision that she was going to speak.
I don't.
Do you recall?
I do know that I think the interview started at a little after 2 p.m.
Okay. No, but I show you a document would maybe help you kind of refresh a little bit on the timeline of that day. Only for the purposes of maybe answering questions that I have. Is that okay? Thank you. Cool.
And the route after this, let us know when we time.
So it might actually be a good time for a break, and I don't know if I can, just a full exhibit. I have my copy. I can maybe give it to Attorney Bowman. It's a short document during the break, and then
Statement. All right, so we'll take 15 and recess.
Right now, since the audio's not on.
Oh, yeah. my Polish moment. Yeah, it's a little difficult to.
About Michelle's position if she went to the third interview and said it.
I just told you. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's the destruction of his alibi. It's not some trivial little thing. That's his whole defense.
And that's what that's the goal of third interview.
It was the goal. There was more to it, but that was the goal.
And did she do that at the third interview?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any discussions before or even as a result of the third interview about protecting Michelle in her legal situation?
I think they weren't satisfied.
And was there at this point, I know that after the first interview, there wasn't a lot of clarity. After that point, was it clear what the non-satisfaction was from the state?
I never got a satisfactory explanation. Whatever they were saying to me was not convincing.
So, you go into the third interview knowing that this is what we're hoping is going to give them some change of attitude. Was there anything that I think you're saying there's nothing after the third interview that you could put your finger on to say this is what's still outstanding?
No, but I wrote the letter 2 weeks later.
I guess that's what I'm leading up to.
No, I talked to the state's attorney and I made clear why I thought she was a credible, invaluable, cooperating witness, why she should not be charged with anything further. I didn't get a satisfactory response. The only response I got was they issued another warrant for her arrest on September 3 for the reckless speeder tampering, which was apparently done on their way down to my office.
Did you consider the possibility of asking before the third interview what the value of her telling them that Dulos wasn't in the house that morning would be?
You mean if we tell you that he wasn't in the house, are you going to give me X?
Yeah.
I didn't have that conversation with him.
Is that something that
he knows I was looking for every consideration?
Okay.
Yeah. I wasn't just saying, oh, hey, let's do this afternoon. No, it was very deliberate on my part, what I wanted to demonstrate to them so that she would get protection, so that she wouldn't be charged again.
Did you feel like she had performed enough to get some protection?
Yeah.
And that letter that you wrote is pretty detailed about the case and the work in your view of the facts, correct?
Correct.
Did you consider writing a letter like that sooner in the case?
Did I consider writing a letter in any other case?
Sooner than that in this case?
No.
Okay. Is it unusual?
I had numerous discussions with Colangelo. I was in his office a lot.
And so I guess what's the reasoning for the letter at that point? Was there any sort of genesis or...
Yeah, he said, why don't you tell me exactly how she's going to help and what her credibility is. So that's what I wrote.
And after that, so whatever conversation you had that had Colangelo asking for that letter, had those meetings that you'd had post third interview been more of the, we don't think she's telling the truth, we want her to tell us more sort of conversations?
Say it again.
So had there been any change in the state's position from before the third interview?
After
it, up to the writing of the letter?
Obviously not.
And at the time you wrote the letter, what was your expectation about how things were going to play out for Mr. Troconis in the case, if you could say?
I thought...
I'm going to object before he answers on relevance.
You may answer.
I thought that there was a split of opinion about her. And it wasn't because somebody said to me, there's a split of opinion. And it wasn't just good cop, bad cop. I thought what I heard during the course of the second interview, where there were people, I don't know if it was Allison or who it was, I don't remember, but who said, because they didn't say it in my presence, okay? Mm-hmm. They said it when Michelle and I had left the room. Maybe she really didn't know. Maybe she doesn't know. So I thought we had accomplished something in the second interview.
Attorney Schoenhorn made a big deal about the second interview that was done in Andy Bowman's office, where after Andy and Michelle left the room, I am heard saying that I don't think she knows, but I think she'd be great. And I was talking to the sergeant that is in charge of the unit that I worked, hand in hand with through this whole investigation, Ken Matreska. And, one of the things that we wanted to do at that interview was find out where Jennifer was. So when I said that I don't think she knows, I don't think she knows where the body is, because that's what we were pressing. That's what we were trying to find out. And she was talking about how she would take us through the woods and, we could go behind the house. She'll show us where he went, those type of things. And I said, I think she'd be great, or I think she's great. That is, again, to the fact that I wanted her to, agree to cooperate and, get a cooperation agreement with her, strike a deal with her so she could testify against Fotis. And ultimately, I wanted to get her to be a witness. And that's why Attorney Bowman kept bringing her in and letting her talk to us, was he was hoping that the same thing would happen. One, that I wouldn't charge her with murder, and two, that I would give her a deal to testify against Fotis.
The circumstances change after the third interview?
They issued an arrest warrant.
And you didn't try the case, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you believe there was any understanding between you and Colangelo that didn't get fully realized because you got out of the case or you were replaced?
I have no reason to believe that.
Okay. And can I
But,
go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, if you're asking me if we had an understanding that the case would have what? I want to make sure that I'm answering the question you're asking.
Based upon what had happened with her attempting to talk and you talking to Attorney Colangelo, did you have a belief about how the case was going to work out for Ms. Troconis if you stayed it through, or if things continued the way they were going?
Objection relevance.
I'll allow it.
When?
After you wrote the letter. The time, say after.
Because a lot happened. She was arrested the second time, and then she was arrested a third time in January. So you're asking me if I had an understanding with Colangelo before the second arrest? No.
What about a belief about how it was going to play out?
No, but it was my job to make it happen. I mean, that's what a lawyer is for. Even me. If you're asking me, would I be able to get her to the point where she was a cooperator, where they were going to give her a tremendous break because she was a cooperator? When Dulos died, that put a big hole in that expectation. And that happened at the end of January of 2020. So there were intervening events that were certainly out of my control.
So taking you back to June 2nd is part of the judgment about whether it's a good idea to talk to the police or not. Is some part of that the idea that unforeseen circumstances can thwart the best laid plans?
I had to evaluate whether they would ever find Jennifer's body. And I thought probability-wise, the probability was they would. It was more than 50%, but it wasn't 100%. Did I have a foreseeable expectation that Fotis Dulos would kill himself? No, that probability was very low. Very low. Or that he might be otherwise unavailable, like, for example, if he were cooperating against her. But yeah, that was the most devastating event, his suicide, as far as Michelle was concerned.
Can I say a moment, Your Honor? I think I might be close to them. Manager, if any chance we could take the afternoon break before I find out, I might save everyone's time. We're going to do a break soon. It's the perfect time for me to.
All right. Well, do you anticipate more direct?
Very boldly.
I have no objection to the break.
Stand in recess for 15 minutes.
All right.
Good afternoon. Please be seated. Any further direct, Mr. Brown?
Very briefly. You discussed the sort of opinions in the room during the second interview of some people saying she might be telling the truth, but she might not know anything.
Yes.
Was Richard Colangelo one of those voices?
I can't be certain, but I don't think he was completely rejecting of what she said.
And you said that you didn't hear them said when they were said, but am I understanding correctly, you had access to the video later and heard some of those things?
Yeah, I heard from, I think it was Attorney Schoenhorn who told me about it initially, and that was shortly after he started representing Ms. Troconis.
And my last question is...
But I heard it.
And even if we talked some things about what information Michelle was relying on related to whether Jennifer was dead, whether Fotis Dulos had a motive to kill Jennifer if she was dead, and even if Fotis Dulos was evil, controlling, did you get information that seems like Michelle had some sort of real, tangible information that she was going on that Fotis Dulos had provided to her about that narrative?
About
she might not be dead. She might have just gone somewhere else.
You're asking me if Michelle had another source for that? No.
I guess the explanation that Michelle had gotten from Dulos, was there some sort of context or evidence that at least Fotis claimed there was to back up some of those concepts, if you know?
Objection relevance.
I'll
Well, he only, my understanding was that he told Ms. Troconis that Jennifer had several years ago disappeared and gone to Colorado and changed her name.
So there were some specifics that she at least was being given about the basis for that.
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing else, Your Honor. Thank you.
cross-examination when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, with the court's permission, may I stay back here for my cross?
Just keep your voice up.
That'll remind me to do so, more than if I was up front. So, okay, Attorney Bowman. Before I get into the representation of Michelle Troconis, I would like to ask you some questions relative to your background, if you can just bear with me. Where did you obtain your college degree from, and what year?
UConn undergraduate in 1967 and law school in 1970.
Okay, and where did you attend law school?
UConn.
You're sorry?
UConn.
Okay, so you're double legacy, so to speak?
Yes.
Okay. And what year did you graduate law school, 1970?
Yes.
When you graduated from law school, what did you do next? Where did you go? Where did you work? Things like that.
Well, the first full-time job that I had, I was appointed to be an assistant United States attorney for this district.
And how long were you a U.S. attorney for?
From June of 1971 through March of 1974.
Okay. And when you were in those 3 years as a U.S. attorney, what kind of cases did you handle?
Drugs, extortion, bank robbery, assault on federal officer, threatening, using the mails for the purpose of sending threatening communications.
And when you handle those cases, did you take any of those cases to trial?
Oh, a lot of them.
Okay, and did those cases go to verdict to your recollection?
They went to verdict. There were only 11 of us for the whole district.
At that time?
At that time. So we were trying a lot of cases, and it was also before the sentencing guidelines, which cut into the number of trials.
So you said when you worked as a U.S. attorney up in 1974. After you left the U.S. attorney's office at some point, what did you do then?
I went into private practice with a small firm in Bridgeport. And 6 months of that 2-year period, I was appointed to defend one of the kidnappers in the Shilton Sponge River Products bombing case.
And did that case receive a lot of press and notoriety?
It was the largest FBI investigation until the first World Trade Center bombing. It was a 6-month trial.
Okay. So that was tried, in 1974, 75?
No, 75, 76. Ended in 76.
Okay. And when did you leave that law firm that you just joined after the U.S. Attorney's Office?
I was appointed by the Second Circuit Judicial Council to be the federal public defender for the District of Connecticut. And I had an office in New Haven and one in Hartford, and I had 3 assistants.
Okay. And how long did you serve as a federal public defender?
Until December 31 of 1979.
And do you remember what kind of cases you handled in that capacity as a federal public defender?
Very similar to what I had tried when I was a prosecutor. You know, also there were some white collar crimes, but it was basically, that was the menu that we were doing federally at the time.
And did you try any cases in defending a client in federal court in that capacity?
All the time.
Did there come a point in time when you went into your own private practice as a criminal defense attorney primarily?
I joined a firm in Southport in January of 1980, right after I left the public defender office. And I was there until April of 1982, and in April of 1982, I opened my own office in Westport.
Okay, I just want to backtrack because I neglected to ask you something for a moment. Did you serve in the United States Armed Forces?
Yeah.
In what branch?
The Army.
Okay, and how long was that for?
For 2 years, a little less than 2 years.
And was that in the 1960s?
It was during the Vietnam War, the early stages of the Vietnam War.
Okay. Now, when you opened up your own practice, and as you said, in April of 1982, was that in Westport?
Yes.
Okay. And have you been doing that since right up to the present day?
Yes. My practice was from April, but I also tried serious federal cases during the period of 80 to 82.
Okay. What kind of serious cases did you try during that 2-year period?
Well, during that period and overlapping, I tried extortion cases. I defended them. One of them was the Hells Angels extortion case, and the other was an organized crime, kind of a loan sharking extortion case.
When you mentioned the Hells Angels case, to your recollection, did that go to trial?
Yes.
And what was the result? Did it go to verdict?
Not guilty.
Not guilty verdict in that matter? Did your practice also include, besides criminal, any civil work?
Yes.
Did the percentage of criminal and civil work sort of vary over the years in your practice?
Yes.
What would you say, generally speaking, percentage of your practice was devoted to criminal?
It was never less than 75%.
And so your civil would be anywhere from 25% to whatever, less than that.
Civil was 25% or less.
In addition to doing trial work and representing clients, you represented clients in pretrial capacities as well?
Yes.
And did you also, in your capacity as a lawyer, ever do any kind of appeals?
Yes.
Did you do any on the state level?
Yes.
Could you give us an idea of how many you've done, or just like a range perhaps?
Well,
minimum?
I did more federal appeals than I did state federal appeals because I was an assistant U.S. attorney and I was a federal defender, and I had also private appeals. There were more. In state, I did less than 10 appeals.
How about in federal court?
I can tell you this. It was probably at least 25. It could have been as many as 35.
Okay, when you say at least 25, where specifically did you argue appeals in federal court?
In the Second Circuit.
Where was that?
New York City.
Okay. How many, in state court, ballpark, how many cases do you think you've tried to verdict or range, would you say?
In state court.
I'll ask you the next question involving federal court in a moment.
In state court, criminal cases to verdict, less than 10.
Okay. And did you try any in the Stanford JD?
Yes.
Okay. And what kind of success did you have trying cases in Stanford JD?
I won. I tried 2 unrelated sexual assault cases in the Stanford JD, and they were both not guilty.
Okay. Were those federal charges? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm withdrawing. Were those felony charges?
Yes.
The same question involving, you said you served as a U.S. attorney, a federal public defender. You do federal work as a private criminal defense attorney. How many federal cases would you say give us a range or an idea, ballpark, that you've tried to verdict?
I think probably over 30, maybe more.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, that's the best I can do. There have been a lot.
Okay.
And they've been, complicated.
Have you ever taught at a higher institution involving anything to do with the law?
Yeah, for 6 years, I taught trial practice at Yale.
You remember when that was, Attorney Bowman?
It was both during and after I was the federal defender.
Have a moment. So you said you graduated from law school in 1970. So roughly, this being 2026, you practiced law for approximately 55 years or so?
Yes.
Now, on your direct examination by questioning from Attorney Brown, my next series of questions are going to be directed relative to your representation of Michelle Troconis, okay? You indicated that you first met her in face-to-face, I think, which was Wednesday, May 29th of 2019 in your office. You first met her face-to-face?
May 29, correct.
And when you spoke to her, you did so privately, correct? In other words, it was just you with her.
Nobody else was present.
You said that it looked as if Dulos had gone with her to your office, but he was never in the room, correct?
No, he was in the waiting area.
And the door was closed when you were speaking to her?
Absolutely.
And you indicated, I think, on your direct that Mr. Dulos had given you a check for $5,000 to represent Michelle Troconis, but you had returned that to Attorney Norman Pattis, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you said there were 2 reasons why you did so. And I think if I look at my notes, one was the obvious potential for conflict of interest. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you said there were 2 reasons. Do you recall what the second was, Attorney Bowman?
Well, it was not only the potential conflict, but I didn't want there to be any ambiguity about who I was representing, because he was obviously somebody who was a target of their investigation.
Okay. And based on your many years of experience as a
that was important for Mr. Troconis to know that I would only be representing her.
And therefore your duty of loyalty to her was unquestionable. Fair enough?
In my view, yes.
And you also, I think, said based on your experience as a criminal defense lawyer in private practice, people generally come to you involving a criminal case if they think there's a probability they may be arrested, right? Often.
Yes.
I mean, this is pre-arrest I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, they also want to know if what they've done is against the law.
Okay. So they sort of go to you for counsel in that situation as well. Fair enough? They go to you for
I didn't get the last part.
They go to you to see you for counsel.
Yes.
For that reason. And you said at the first meeting with her, this is, again, my questions will be directed to the May 29, 2019 meeting in your office with Michelle Troconis. You said you obtained a history from her about her life and how she met Mr. Dulos and all of that nature, right?
Yes.
They met down in Miami and they had their love of water skiing, for example, in common, right?
Yes.
And then you said, you're not sure if it was platonic or not, but at some point you said you think the relationship evolved into something romantic or intimate, right?
Yes.
When you obtained a history from her, did you consider herself well-educated? Michelle Troconis, that is.
Well, she told me that she had, passed high school 3.5 years in training in special ed. So I assume, that is, in my view, that's certainly a valuable education.
Okay. And when you met with her, you noted, I think, in your direct examination that Spanish was her first language, correct?
It was her first language.
Right. But her English was quite proficient in your estimation.
Yeah, I didn't have trouble either understanding what she said, and if she didn't understand something that I said, we remedied it very quickly.
Okay. And from your point of view, did she appear to understand what you were saying?
Yes.
You had no difficulty understanding her?
No.
What she was saying in English?
No difficulty.
And you indicated before that you know a few words in Spanish, but you're not fluent.
Correct.
At that first meeting, did you get any sense or any idea where you thought perhaps this person, Fotis Dulos, was perhaps had controlled her, was controlling her at that juncture?
Well, it was fairly clear that she was certainly being manipulated by him.
And why did you sort of reach that conclusion, if you will, at that time?
Well, because he started the relationship with her in a lie. I mean, he told her that, yes, he was married. I mean, she saw his kids in Florida.
Right.
She knew he was married. And he told Mr. Troconis that the marriage was basically done except for signing. And she uprooted herself and came to Connecticut.
Really under a false pretense, so to speak. Right.
Looked to me like it was false pretenses.
Did Ms. Troconis in that initial meeting with you on that May 29th date, did she appear comfortable with you?
I think she grew more comfortable.
As time went on?
Yeah. I mean, I thought I thought it was a good meeting. And, she was concerned about her situation.
Okay. Now, with that, I think you also said in your direct examination that as far as the retainer agreement goes, that did not come about until the following Monday, which would have been June 3rd.
Correct.
Right? So you didn't think about a retainer, nothing involving a retainer agreement took place at all on May 29th.
Correct.
Okay. Was it be fair to say?
But, I mean, there was no piece of paper, but it was my understanding that Dulos was giving me $5,000 to begin representing Michelle Troconis.
Okay. But that, as you indicated earlier in your testimony, you returned to Attorney Pattis. You identified the reasons as to why.
Of course.
At the initial meeting, I think she handed you some kind of a piece of paper indicating what she claimed she did on the date of May 24th of 2019, right?
Yes.
Let's have a moment, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I approach the clerk and retrieve Respondent's Exhibit O?
Of course.
Thank you.
If you want to examine, you can, but otherwise, go ahead.
I'll look at it after if I need to. Go ahead.
Understood.
I haven't.
Counsel, just stay near microphones when you're speaking. Those things work. Of course, you don't have to ask.
I glanced at it, Your Honor. We have a copy of it.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, Attorney Bowman, for the record, I'm showing you this is a copy of Respondent's Exhibit 4. Can you take a moment to look at it and see if you recognize it?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
This was the timeline that Michelle Troconis gave me on May 29th.
Okay, she said, did she do that timeline at the behest of one of Fotis Dulos' lawyers on an earlier date?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as I understood it, he told them that they should do it.
Okay, and she did that timeline.
She did the timeline.
And as far as you know, she said she prepared that, and that is in her handwriting.
Correct.
Do you recall whether or not you discussed that timeline with her on that day, or you just sort of reviewed it?
No, we discussed it.
Okay. And it looks like the timeline ends around 5:10, right? That
Yes.
last entry? Okay. And there's an absence of anything involving Fotis Dulos dumping trash in receptacles in Hartford or anything of that nature, correct?
Correct.
That's an omission, if you will.
It's not there.
And there's no mention of her visit to Starbucks following that dumping of the trash with Mr. Fotis.
It's not there either.
And there's no mention in the timeline of her having seen Fotis Dulos with Ken Mawini, when she indicated that she saw them on the morning of May 24th and the June 2nd interview
No,
at around 8:15, correct? What
There is
she
not.
claimed?
there is not.
Now, you also testified on you said that, let me just withdraw from it. Early on in your direct examination, you knew that Fotis's phone had been seized, correct?
Yes,
And if memory serves, I think you said perhaps the following day, which would have been May 25th of 2019. Does that sound about right?
that's the day he went to the New Canaan police station. They seized his phone.
Okay. And I think, if my notes are correct, you said the seizure of that phone was a big deal. Can you expand on that? Why you thought, in your estimation, the seizure of Mr. Dulos' phone was a big deal?
Because they can track the phone. Where the phone pings, they can track it. So they would be able to tell where Fotis Dulos had been on prior occasions.
That, of course, assumes that the phone is on the individual's person, right? Or in their car, things like that, right?
It pings where the phone is. Right. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I leave my phone home, if I go 100 miles out, it's not going to show that. Right?
If you leave your phone at home, your phone's going to reflect that the phone was at home.
Correct. Okay. Now, you said in your direct examination, you learned at some point the police had a search warrant, I guess, for the persons of Michelle Troconis and Fotis Dulos on or about May 31st of 2019, a week after the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos, right?
Yes.
And you understood that, at least you later perhaps learned, that the search warrant concerning those two individuals was sealed for 14 days, right?
Yes.
By way of a court order.
Yes.
So you never saw it at that time because of the sealing order.
Correct.
When you learned of her arrest, which I think you said it was the evening of Saturday, June 1st of 2019, at some point you went to the New Canaan Police Department.
It was the early morning hours of Saturday, June
2nd?
2nd.
Okay, my apologies.
That's right.
Okay.
It was a little after 1 a.m.
Okay, and that's, to your best of your recollection, that's when you went down there to New Canaan PD at that time for the first time?
No, I went down there the following morning, that morning. In other words, I didn't go at 2 o'clock, I don't believe.
Okay. Did you learn of her arrest at 1 or so?
Yeah, they called me.
Okay.
They woke me up.
Okay, my apologies. So now we're talking about, this is Sunday, June 2nd of 2019. And then at some point you went down to New Canaan Police where she was and you spoke to her.
Correct.
Okay. And when you spoke to her, let me draw that for a moment. When you spoke to her on the phone initially, you told her not to speak to the police, correct?
Yes.
And then when you went and saw her down in New Canaan Police and you met with her face to face and you spoke to her privately, you again indicated not to speak.
Yes.
And I think if the logs appear to be correct, you went down there 3 times total, sort of that day. You came a second time, you met with Miss Troconis, and you spoke to her, and it was still the same position of not to speak to the police.
Correct.
And you spoke, when you spoke to her, you made it clear to her that she had an absolute right not to speak to the police.
Yes.
And in fact, you indicated before she was advised of her Miranda rights. Right.
Yes.
And then I'm just trying to understand this chronologically. At some point, you received a phone call where you spoke to attorney Richard Colangelo, who was at that time the state's attorney for the Stanford Judicial District.
Yes.
Okay. And then just to be, again, you said you had many dealings with Mr. Colangelo over the years,
I did.
including when he was an assistant prior to his elevation to the top of the office, right?
Yes.
You indicated that obviously you're going to have disagreements. He's an adversary, but your relationship with him, professional relationship, you define as mutual respect for one another.
I thought so.
Okay. And that in your dealings with him in all those cases, from the time he was an assistant to the time he was head of the office, you never had any bad dealings. You never saw even a hint of any kind of deception on his part.
No deception. We had adversarial relationship.
Right.
We didn't necessarily agree because of the nature. I was defending somebody he was prosecuting, but I never found him to be deceptive.
And members of his own office, you had the same experience where your dealings with them were cordial and professional?
They were professional, and it depends on the particular assistant,
Okay.
but they were always professional.
Okay. And you indicated that in that office you had, over the time secured 2 acquittals of sexual assault cases.
Correct.
Now, when you spoke to Mr. Colangelo, the conversation was rather direct. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you think you indicated that at some point Mr. Colangelo indicated to you that when or if we find the body, I'm charging her, meaning Michelle Troconis, with accessory murder, right?
Yes.
And the tone and the manner in which he said that, you took that assertion seriously.
Yeah, I thought it was a credible threat and statement of present intention.
And you had no reason to doubt or think that he was bluffing in any way based on your prior dealings with him and the seriousness of this case.
No. I believed
Go ahead.
it was something he genuinely intended to do if the contingency, that is, if she doesn't cooperate and if we find Jennifer Dulos. So if those two things happen, if she's truthful and they find Jennifer Dulos, it was my impression they would not charge her with accessory murder.
Okay, and that was really a motivating factor for her and you to speak to the police, right?
It was.
And so you also indicated that you had to make a calculus and determine, in your estimation, what was the probability that they were going to find the body at that point. And you indicated more than 50%. So you have to weigh that in to your decision on counseling the client, correct?
Yes.
And so in a way, would you agree with me that time is rather important here? You can't just sit back and wait weeks to think about it because they could find the body and the equation is going to change at that point, right?
That was my impression. There was a time factor in this.
Okay. And so you counseled her accordingly, knowing that.
Yes, I had to tell her everything that I knew and everything that I understood about what he was saying and who he was.
And so you indicated, you made it patently clear to her that if she goes in there, withdrawn, it was her decision to go in there as well.
It's ultimately her decision.
Okay. Just like sort of analogous to the decision to testify at trial. Ultimately, that's the client's, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Same with whether or not to cooperate. You can counsel them, but in the last analysis, it's their decision whether or not to do so, right?
It was her decision based upon what I had told her.
And did you?
Based upon what she knew, okay? I mean, she knew she had a factual source aside from me. I mean, she had certain knowledge about what was happening on May 24th.
Right. And she reduced that knowledge, if you will, or that timeline to writing, right?
Well, and she would have taken into consideration not only what I told her, but what she knew and what Colangelo had said.
Okay. And you essentially told her, listen, if you go in there, I want to be crystal clear. You cannot in any way, shape, or form lie or mislead them in any way. That you must be 100% truthful. You told her that and knows sort of the essence of that?
I told her that she shouldn't even go in there if she wasn't going to tell the truth. That if she goes in, she must tell the truth. And I was pretty firm about it.
Okay. And did she acknowledge that admonition by you?
She agreed to go in.
But she understood that she assured you, I can be truthful, I will go in there.
She appeared to understand what I was saying. Yeah.
So you made it clear in no uncertain terms about that she must be truthful. There's 100% certain of that.
Absolutely.
Now, it's fair to say that one reason that you thought she would be a present well or be a good witness is because, like you said in your direct examination, that you found her persuasive, right?
Yes.
In your dealings with her privately.
Yes.
Okay. Could you expand on that a little bit? How did you make that assessment?
Well, she was clear in what she told me about why she did the timeline and that she had given it thought, and this was the timeline. This is what she did on May 24th.
And certainly at that juncture, you had no reason to doubt her veracity, right?
I had no reason to doubt her veracity from what she said. She was, as I said earlier, she was the third point in this triangle. And, I had to be aware of that.
So when she went to speak to the police on June 2nd, I know this is all captured on tape and audio, and there's a transcript. So that obviously that speaks for itself. But what she had told the police on that day was consistent with what she had told you privately, right?
Yes.
Okay. In other words, she didn't tell you one thing and tell them something entirely different, but you went in there, right? She was consistent.
Everything that she told me was consistently related to the police.
Okay.
To the what?
To the police.
And I think at some point in the interview, you indicated to the police that what she has told you is what she told me privately.
Correct.
You indicated to her that the importance of being truthful because they could use those statements against her if she's not.
Yes.
She appeared to understand that when you told her that as well.
I made it real clear. She appeared to understand what I was saying.
What about her demeanor and the inflection of her voice? Do you think that counseled in favor of her credibility at that juncture?
Which junction?
The June 2nd interview.
Yeah. Yes, I did.
Would you agree with me that her display of emotion, in your opinion, perhaps enhanced her credibility?
Well, they had seen her before I ever arrived when the transfer was made to New Canaan.
Okay.
And they were very attentive to her. We know you've been through a lot. We know that this has been very difficult for you. What can we bring you? They brought her a blanket. They offered her food, water. They were very solicitous. Okay. But, is it part of the act?
Right.
Sure.
She also was a client, perhaps in contrast to some you've represented, who had no prior criminal record, right?
Correct. But I can't speak to other people.
Okay. Did Mr. Colangelo ever say to you, quote, if she did not speak with the police about Jennifer's disappearance, she would be charged with accessory to murder and would never see her child again? He never said that to you, did he?
I have no knowledge of him ever saying that she would never see her child again.
Okay. So certainly your counsel to her perhaps motivated her to cooperate because of the time was certainly important to cooperate at that juncture because of what Mr. Colangelo had relayed to you about if they found the body. Right?
Time was an imperative.
May I approach the clerk again?
Of course.
I just need a moment, please. This is a copy of what's been, this is Respondent's Exhibit 10. Can you take a look at that, Attorney Bowman?
It's a standard notice of rights.
And you see on that standard notice of rights, Michelle Troconis' signature.
Yes.
You were present when that was done on June 2nd, 2019 interview.
Yeah, it's at 2:24 in the afternoon.
Right. And your recollection is she also signed the waiver of rights that Detective Kimball had shown her, correct?
Yes, I saw it.
And at that interview, she never requested the presence of a Spanish-speaking officer, correct?
Correct.
And on the back of the waiver form, it was in English, and the back of it is in Spanish. She never turned it over in Spanish to look at it.
He told her it was in Spanish.
On the back.
Correct.
But she never, you see in the video, she never turned it over.
She asked him if he spoke Spanish. He said no.
And you said during the interview or some point earlier, the police gave her a blanket, meaning Miss Troconis?
Yes.
And they gave her some kind of beverage?
Yeah, they offered her food. She declined. I'm not sure if She also declined the beverage. They may have given it to her.
Earlier
No, I think then,
at the time? Okay.
yeah. But I'm just not.
And do you recall the police asking her, all my questions, by the way, are going to relate to the June 2nd interview, okay?
Okay.
Do you recall her telling the police, do you recall the police asking Ms. Troconis if she was willing to help, and she responded yes? Remember that in the interview?
Yeah.
You recall there sometimes during the interview where she sort of had a tendency or an affinity to digress, and then you would kind of help steer her back? You indicated at one point on the interview that you told the police that her statements were not rehearsed and that a lawyer would be asking the same questions of her that the police were. Do you recall that?
I believe that's accurate.
You remember the police telling her that they didn't think she had anything to do with the killing of Jennifer Dulos, but they also thought she had information that could help perhaps find her. Remember that?
Yes.
And then I think near the end of that interview of June 2nd, you indicated to police that you were of the opinion that she should not be charged as an accessory. You remember that?
Yes.
And you said earlier that in your experience, let me withdraw. In the past, have you represented clients who have cooperated with the authorities? And you said that in your experience, cooperation is sort of counterintuitive. Can you again elaborate on what you meant by that?
The natural instinct for many people who cooperate is to minimize their own involvement, believing that they become less likely to be punished when, in fact, the more they're involved, the more they know, the more valuable they are to the prosecution. So it's understandable. And I've seen it a number of times where initially someone may minimize their own involvement or what they know, and then over time it evolves into the truth. I mean, I've had people who've done it where there've been guilty pleas by the co-defendant, and I've had people who've been witnesses at trial and been cross-examined on the fact that they gave differing accounts of important details.
Because of that?
But they still testified. They still got big consideration from the sentencing judge. And it happens in America. You can read about it in the papers.
You indicated that you spent a lot of time with her, and in your experience, she does rely on her phone. Do you remember what you meant by that?
She does rely on her phone. She also gave me a timeline of phone calls on May 29th. But she relies on the phone not only to corroborate who she was talking to on the phone, but whether it has a relationship to any events.
Okay. And you noticed as much to the police when you indicated that to them?
Yeah, and they understood it. She would ask, well, I have this particular information on my phone. And they would say, well, let's talk about what you remember.
Now, in the first interview, the police, to your knowledge, certainly would not have access to that timeline you referred to earlier. Remember, I think it was State's Exhibit O, the one that she showed you in her office on May 29th?
I don't believe they did.
Okay. And the record indicates that that timeline was seized at Fort Jefferson the following day, which would have been June 3rd, 2019.
It was seized for Jefferson,
Right.
Okay, yes. It was the day we were in court.
Right, that Monday, the 3rd.
Right.
I think you also indicated at the end of the interview, again, this is June 2nd, that you indicated, police, you don't see her as lying, but she could be wrong or inaccurate. Remember that?
Yes.
And that was your chance as a lawyer to advocate for her, right?
Well, that was the objective.
Okay. And you said that if Mr. Colangelo was at that interview, you would tell him the same thing, that, she may be wrong or inaccurate, but you don't see her as lying. I think you told the police that as well. If Mr. Colangelo was in the room.
I told them all that.
Okay. You also told the police at one point that it's a big blow to know a person you trusted is capable of this kind of thing, because that A, Fotis Dulos did this, and B, that he involved her, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you thought that was important to show the type of person he was and the type of control he had over her, right?
Yes.
And you recall seeing the interview that at the end of that first interview, she asked to give you a hug? You don't remember that?
No, I don't remember.
Okay. But if it's on the video, you have no reason to dispute that.
I'm saying I don't recall it.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about that week of June 3rd with you. Those are going to be my next series of questions to you for my cross. You met with her on the 3rd. You discussed a retainer agreement and things of that nature, correct?
Yes.
And that was in your office in Westport?
Yes.
And did you have any further discussions about her situation with her at that time, if you recall?
I could have. It was an exhausting few days. So I said, and her parents were there for her. I felt that the appropriate and important thing right at that moment was for her to be with her family.
Okay. And then at some point you had discussions during that week, I think you indicated, with the state's attorney, Richard Colangelo, right?
Yes.
Okay. And can you again describe, withdrawn? Do you remember how many discussions you had with Mr. Colangelo prior to the second interview, which took place in your office on June 6th?
Well, I mean, I was telling him that I had the view that she was not deliberately lying and that she needs another opportunity to set the record straight.
Okay. And you made that clear to him?
He agreed. Yeah.
And he agreed to your request?
And I said, but it has to be at my office because we're not going back to police stations or police barracks.
Okay. And did Mr. Colangelo acquiesce in your request?
Yep.
Okay. Did you, before that June 6th interview, did you meet with Ms. Troconis? That would have been Tuesday, June 4th. Do you recall?
I'm sure I met with her in person after Monday, which was the 3rd. So I met with her either on the 4th or 5th or both.
Okay. And when you met with her, was it for a considerable amount of time?
Yeah, sure. I discussed with her, the interview she had just been through. I discussed with her the importance of trying to get them to understand that she's telling them the truth and that this was the opportunity to do it, and they're going to come to my office here to do it.
And according to your billing records, you met with her on June 4th for about you put in about 5.5 hours on the case, and then you met with her again and reviewed some emails the following day on June 5th at 4.9 hours. That sounds about correct.
I don't think I met with her for 5.5 hours, but I was working on the case and meeting with her.
So, Attorney Bowman, when you met with her, you discussed with her the June 2nd interview, which took place a few days earlier.
Yes.
And then you discussed with her what you anticipated might be the questioning involving the June 6th interview, right?
Yes.
And you discussed those at length with her?
Yes.
And again, did she appear to understand what you were saying?
She understood.
When you went into the interview in your office, when they went on June 6th, were you of the opinion that she was well prepared in terms of answering the questions and that she would be forthright?
She was certainly prepared as to what the questioning would involve.
And
they showed up with a bunch of police.
Right.
So they didn't all participate in the interview. There were, I think, 4 state troopers, and then Mr. Colangelo came.
At some point late in the interview, Mr. Colangelo walked in.
Yes, he did.
Okay. So the 4 officers, for the record, I'm probably the last name of one of them may escape me, but their last names were Ventresca, right?
Yeah, I know.
Mr. Clabby?
Yeah.
Mr. Kimball?
Yeah.
And there's a woman, my apologies, I think her first name was Allison.
Right.
Male detective.
Right, that's my recollection.
Okay.
Yeah. There's also a WNBC reporter who I happened to see walking down the sidewalk toward my office before the meeting actually took place. So obviously he had a tip from somebody not coming from my office.
Okay.
And I was concerned about it, and I told him.
You were concerned about it to whom?
I was concerned that all of a sudden now the press knows that we're having this meeting. I mean, that was not what I wanted to see.
Fair to say that was a bit unsettling, to say the least.
Well, it was a matter of concern.
Before the interview took place, when you met with her a day or both days, like one day before, 2 days before, you again stressed to her the importance of telling the truth.
Yes.
And that to be completely upfront with them. Right?
I told her to be truthful.
And she acknowledged that she would be to you.
She acknowledged that she understood it.
Okay. Do you remember when the police emphasized to her that they didn't think she was totally truthful the last time, and that she assured them that she understood and that she would answer their questions truthfully? Do you remember that?
Yes.
You call her telling the police that, yes, she agreed to talk for this interview?
Yes.
And it's fair to say you emphasized to her the importance of describing the events of May 24th and being accurate. Remember that? You remember stressing to her the importance of telling them May 24th what she knew?
Yes.
The script that the officers were mentioning on the June 6th interview, that was the same one that she had provided to you the week earlier on May 29th, right?
Yes.
When the police at times doubted her story, certain points, you didn't stop the interview. Again, I think Attorney Brown asked you that, but what's your recollection as
There was one episode in the beginning where Kimball doubted her recollection of why she went into her daughter's bedroom to sleep. And she said that her daughter was frightened. And he said, and I'm not sure when she said it or if she said something about a thunderstorm. I think she did say a thunderstorm. And he said, I checked the weather. There was no thunderstorm that night. And she clearly was talking about very heavy rain. And it was just ridiculous what he had challenging her on.
Okay.
And it was, she held her ground.
Okay. And so it's fair to say you want to see how she would handle herself in that situation, right?
I had seen how she had handled herself on the 2nd, and I was right there to see how she was handling herself on the 6th.
And you thought she did a commendable job at handling herself?
I thought she did. I thought she was okay. I thought she did all right.
Do you remember you testified earlier that at some point State's Attorney Colangelo did come into that second interview in your office?
Yes.
Do you remember Mr. Colangelo telling Ms. Troconis that he would not have come in if he believed for a second that she knew what Photos was going to do, and tells her that she's here because he believes she can help? You remember that?
Yes.
So when you heard that, it's fair to say that in your mind, perhaps the strategy was working, that she was cooperating, and that her providing information to the police would help her and them.
The strategy would work.
Right.
The strategy would help.
Right. And so that's sort of, at that moment anyway, in time, confirmation that perhaps it was working based on the State's Attorney's comments at that time.
Yes.
You remember Mr. Colangelo also stating to her that you're just too trusting at that time? Do you remember that? Or something, words to that effect?
Yeah, I don't have a specific recollection of that, but
If it's on the tape, you have the reason to doubt.
yeah, of course.
Okay. When they took a break and you spoke to her outside, when the officer stayed in your conference room, do you recall what you may have spoken to her about, meaning Mr. Troconis?
I do.
Okay. But you recall later seeing on there that one of the officers commented that perhaps she's being truthful and telling us what she knows or doesn't know?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
That would be further evidence that at that juncture, at that point in time, you thought the strategy was working for her.
With one of the metaphoric jurors, yes. I think there were real questions. there were real questions about a lot of, let me say this. There were real questions about whether she was lying about everything. Okay. I don't think they thought she was lying about everything.
Okay.
It was just the critical things that they were concerned about, that they believed she was not being truthful.
Well, one of those things, of course, was the fact that when she said at 6:40 that Fotis, she was in the shower and Fotis joined her in the shower, they said that's not so. Right?
That's correct.
So
I later saw evidence of why it could not have been true.
okay, when you say you later saw evidence, can you expand on that, what you mean?
Yeah, if you look at the second warrant, the September 3, 2019 warrant,
Yep.
that warrant shows the Tacoma. And I think they had it wrong in the beginning. They thought it was the Raptor that he used to go down to Stanford, but it was the Tacoma that they finally decided was the vehicle that Fotis used to go down to New Canaan. So at 6:36 a.m., they have Fotis in the Tacoma driving past the rest area in Fairfield off of exit 46, then, or 46, now it's known as something else.
Right, that's on Route 15, the Merritt Parkway.
Merritt Parkway southbound at 6:36 a.m. And slightly after 7 a.m., they have the Tacoma with Fotis driving past the New Canaan service area southbound on the Merritt Parkway. And then there are a series of surveillance, both from school buses and other entities, that showed that he was in New Canaan that morning and could not possibly have taken a shower with her. She said she woke up at 6:40 a.m. and at 6:36 he was in Fairfield, Connecticut on the Merritt.
So that really put to rest any notion that she was telling the truth on that time.
In my mind.
In your mind, correct?
Yeah. I mean, if the police say they're convinced of A and they can have their opinion, I mean, there are many, many instances where a lawyer hears what the police say, has a different view.
Right.
But once you know conclusively, then you know there's a...
And that, in your mind, when you read that affidavit of September of 2019, that did provide to you definitive proof that that was just not so, what she put down.
It was definitive proof.
And what she told the police on the first interview, I'm going to go back to June 2nd of 2019. Among other things, she had stated that she had seen Ken Lewinnie, his friend and attorney, with Mr. Dulos in their office around 8 or 8:15. That was not so either, right?
It could not have been so.
Okay, so it's fair to say that after you looked at that warrant, you knew she had lied about that as well.
It was an alibi. It was a false alibi.
So what she told you privately, she had misled you as well, in that sense.
Fair to say.
Yeah. But then I know I'm jumping all over the place, but near the end of the June 6th interview, one of the officers tells her that you were helping us out at this point. So that, again, it would be, in your mind, at that time, evidence that perhaps your strategy was working at near the conclusion of that second interview, right?
There was reason to be hopeful.
Or optimistic?
Hopeful.
Okay. Now, after the June 6th interview, there's sort of a long hiatus when she speaks to the police again. It's not for like a little bit more than 2 months. You said you had discussions with Mr. Colangelo between the June 6th date and the August 13th date, right?
Yes.
And that some of those discussions took place in his office face-to-face?
Yeah, I was down there a lot.
Okay, for other matters, and then you happened to be in the
I was
neighborhood?
down there on this a lot.
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't just, I'll stop by and talk to him about this. I was primarily focused on Michelle's case.
So when you saw him those times, it was by design. Fair enough?
Yes.
Let's jump ahead to the August 13th, 2019, the third and final interview where you're present with Ms. Troconis and the police, okay? You said that took place in Bridgeport, and was that Troop G?
Yes.
And the police tell her from the get-go, at the outset, that this is her opportunity to explain herself and put things in perspective, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you looked at this, it's fair to say you looked at this opportunity, if you will, this third and final interview as a chance to rehabilitate herself.
That was the objective.
And that objective, you could argue, was perhaps shared by one or more members of law enforcement or Mr. Colangelo.
Well, I don't think they would have agreed to that interview if they thought they were just going to hear what they consider to be the same old thing.
Okay. And I think at one point early on in the interview, about the 5.5 minute mark, she acknowledged, meaning Ms. Troconis, that she was not 100% truthful in the first two interviews. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And this is the time when they now ask her, they explore the whole thing involving the Tacoma that Mr. Dulos apparently went down from Farmington to the New Canaan area on May 24th of 2019, right?
Yes.
That any reference in that of that Tacoma was never in her timeline, was it?
No.
Okay. That became an important piece of evidence for the state, right? So it appeared at that time.
After that afternoon, it became important.
Okay. And at some point,
What I'm saying is that with respect to Ms. Troconis, the Tacoma became important at 80 Mountain. I mean, she didn't make reference to the Tacoma anywhere in the timeline.
right?
But the importance of the Tacoma happened at 80 Mountain that afternoon.
And why was that?
That wasn't mentioned in the timeline, but that was the omission that I was, most concerned about. There just wasn't any reference to it.
Okay. And then that reference of the Tacoma at 80 Mountain Spring, that was explored during that third interview, right?
Yeah.
During what? I'm sorry.
Explored.
Explorated.
And how she became in possession of the keys of the Tacoma also became important, right?
Well, they thought it was important. They had a theory about it, but she didn't really know how she came into possession of the keys.
So it's fair to say she really never gave an explanation about how she came into possession of it?
She said she didn't know. I tended to believe her. She didn't know if Fotis had just put the keys in the Cherokee that she was driving, but she didn't come up with some explanation. She seemed to be struggling to understand why the keys are all of a sudden in the Cherokee, which she had been driving away, and then she drove it back.
Okay.
But I know what their theory was about it.
What was that theory? What was your understanding of that theory?
Their theory was that somebody put the keys to the Tacoma. The Tacoma was Pavel, who was the employee. That was his car. And the day of the homicide, Pavel took the Raptor, which was the truck in Hartford that night that Fotis was using to dump the bags, that Fotis took the Tacoma and Pavel had taken the Raptor to do his job. He worked for construction in New Canaan. So he comes back and Fotis wanted to, this is their theory, that Fotis wanted to keep the Tacoma to continue to clean it. And therefore, when Pavel said the keys aren't in the Tacoma, where are the keys? Fotis calls Michelle and says, come back, you have those keys to the Tacoma. And, her version is, I didn't know I had him in the Cherokee when I drove away.
Okay, so it's fair to say that they had a different interpretation of what she said.
Yeah, they thought that Fotis was deliberately trying to delay Pavel taking the car and didn't want him to take the car that night to go home with the Tacoma.
Right.
Right.
What did you make of her sort of fooling around with Fotis Dulos right before Pavel arrives near the Tacoma?
I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought.
Okay.
Chose to ignore it.
And you said near the end of the interview, you asked Michelle Troconis, your client, is there anything else that you can tell them regarding this investigation. Do you remember that? Some words of that effect. Do you remember something like that?
I'm sorry, when? It's getting late, but
No, I know. It's almost 5. Near the end of the interview, you directly asked Ms. Troconis if there's anything else that she can tell the police about the details. Remember that? Was that an effort to show that you want to impress upon the police that she should be open?
yes.
Mr. Zentner, on that point, why don't you find a good place to finish for the day, and we'll have to resume with this on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell the court and Attorney Brown, I'm probably 2/3 at least through my cross based on my notes. So to give everybody an idea how much longer I'm going to be.
If this is a good place to
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to alert the court about how much longer I anticipate being.
All right. Thank you. All right. We'll stand adjourned for the day.